Hello, Vanya. My name is Christopher Ford, and I'm one of the admins for the VC Against Bullying campaign. So this year we're doing, well, it's our first annual VC Against Bullying campaign. We hope to do a number more in the later years, but this is our very first one. And one of the things that we're doing is something called MyStory. It's an opportunity for anyone in the Vanya community or anyone in the York U community to submit a story, any stories that they might have on how bullying has touched their lives. So whether that means, whether that means you were bullied, whether that means you knew someone who was bullied, or maybe even you were the bully. It's the stories are about how bullying has affected your life on a personal level, um, in whatever way that might be. So, and we hope to use them to so that people can learn and people can understand what, you know, first of all, what bullying, what the many types of bullying are, and the kinds of effects that it has on people's lives. Because I don't think people really truly understand sometimes. So the things you do, the things you say, they have such an impact on other people. And let me share with you a little story of mine, and I think it'll, it'll become clear. So it all started when I used to live in Mississauga. I live in Markham now. I moved here about 10 years ago. And so I went to elementary school in Mississauga for up until grade 3, and then I moved here. Um, but you know, it all started in grade 1, basically. Um, by when I moved out of kindergarten, um, I ate a little more than the than the next kid, and I gained a bit of weight, so I was a bit of a chubby kid, you know, um, and I had lots of problems with my weight when I was younger, and I still do, but I feel like I'm working on that. But anyways, um, so it all started in grade 1, and I was I tried to be relatively sociable, but I was never really too great at meeting new people. After kindergarten, we had a lot of kids left to go to other schools, and some new kids came in, and it was difficult at first to get used to all the new people, and it wasn't exactly a new surrounding, but sometimes when you're with an entirely new group of people, it can feel that way. Um, and I did make some friends, and it was really really great to know that I had friends to count on, and I had a group that I belonged to. But that group of friends that I thought I had, I guess, one day they would you know they would be nice and they'd let me play with them, and everything would be fine. But then the next, it was like the world turned on its side. Everything was completely different. Those same people who had treated me nice and who told me that they were my friend and who had asked to come to my birthday party would turn around and call me fat, call me chubby, and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. There's too much fat in your throat." And hearing that, I was a bit of an emotional child, so I used to cry a lot about it, and it and I guess that made it worse. Whenever I would get upset about it, it would just get worse and worse. People would come up with new things to say, new cruel things. And there was some days where I'd have to run from them in school because in the wintertime they'd be whipping ice at me, or in the summertime if they found a broken bottle on the grass, they would whip the glass shards at me. Or whenever the school paid those guys to come aerate the lawn, they would take those little dirt pellets and whip them at me. And but the names would still continue. But then the next day, things would be back to normal. They'd be my friends again. And I waited for those days to come when they would just stop with the names, and when they would just accept me into the group. So I endured that for probably basically up until I left. But at the beginning of grade 3, we had a new kid came to our school. I think his name was Conrad, but um, yeah, no, his name was Conrad. But he, he was a really really nice guy. And when I first introduced myself to him, he was really nice. He maybe had different interests than a lot of us, but I mean that's to be expected, right? But he was a really really nice kid. And but then the other kids, they started making fun of him right off the bat. And you'd think that I would stand up for him and say no, that's not good, having endured that myself. But the just simply the fact that they were focusing on someone else other than me. You know, I almost enjoyed that, because for a minute they would, you know, forget that I was fat, or forget that I was emotional, or just they would forget about me. I wouldn't be the object of their attention. And so I sometimes joined in, and I was there right with them making fun of Conrad. I was a bully. But then, when they weren't around, I was still his friend, because I did like him. He was a really really nice guy. But then, whenever they were around, it was all back right to making fun of Conrad, because I didn't, I didn't want that cruelty directed towards me. And I think about that all the time. You know, I think about the effect that I must have had on his life, the loss of self worth he must have felt, because I know I felt it, and I have felt it in my lifetime, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. And I wished I would have done something differently. I mean, having having known how that feels, and I know it's not like, it might not be to the same extent as some of the other stories that I've heard, but just when people make you feel like that you do not belong, when people make you feel like you're an outcast, or that you're something different, and not only something different, because it's okay to feel different, not just something different, but something that's wrong. When people bully you, and when people point out your differences and laugh at them, and mock them, and say that that's bad, you have this extreme loss of self-esteem, and you have this almost this hatred that you direct in towards yourself. You want to be different so bad, you know and just considering how I probably made him feel, it haunts me. It's because I remember. So the moral of this story, guys, is don't just don't just sit back. Don't just sit back and join the rest of what the group is saying. I've being a philosophy major, I've learned a lot about logic and reasoning, and the one thing you need to remember is, in anything in your lifetime, you need to you need to sit back, and you need to consider what you're doing, and what you're saying, and what you're thinking. And you have to say, is this right? Is what I'm doing, is that okay? And bullying is not. It is not okay. You know, I I'm sure some other people have stories like me, where they were bullied, and then they're, in an attempt to escape that, they bullied other people. But that's not the answer. You know, there's not the answer. The answer is to address the bullying. The answer is to tell the other kids to stop. And if they don't stop, if you cannot handle it yourself, and when I say handle it, I don't mean in a physical way, because physical violence is not something I support. But if you cannot handle it yourself, that's when you appeal to an authority. That's where you tell a parent, or an older sibling, or a teacher, or whatever. Okay? You don't just simply try and direct the group's attention to something else. Because at the end of the day, that's something else, that's someone else. They're going to be suffering just as much, if not more, than you are. So keep that in mind. And keep that in mind when, you know, when in your daily life you're saying things like, "Oh yeah, that's so gay," or "That's retarded," or "He's such a sped," or anything that you're saying. These phrases and these false adjectives have become integrated into our daily life, and they have an effect on people, guys. They have an effect. Okay, so anyways, so I just want to thank you guys for watching the video and for being involved with our campaign. We really really do appreciate it, and it's really something that we're passionate about. We really want to send out the message that bullying is not okay. Bullying should not be in our society whatsoever. Some people say kids can be cruel. Some people say, it's, oh yeah, it's something that everyone has to go through, but it shouldn't be. It really should not be. And hopefully by the end of the campaign, you're going to think so too. Thanks, guys.